Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to begin. Thank you so much for attending. Please turn off your cell phones to avoid any interruptions in the program. And if you do not want your photo taken, please let the Board of Trade staff know. We do use photos for both internal and external publications. I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade, and welcome to the third Surrey Development Industry Forum, because in Surrey, our development industry is thriving. Thank you so much for attending this morning. I'd just like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of our Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen. Today's event, without sponsors, events at the Surrey Board of Trade could not take place. So I'd like to thank Applin and Martin Consultants. Let's give them a great round of applause, please. And just a little bit about them. Applin and Martin is a world-class team of civil engineers, architects, land surveyors, and urban planners. They've been delivering innovative, cost-effective solutions for clients across diverse industries, and they have been an amazing partner in city building right here in Surrey, British Columbia. For over 50 years, they've been dedicated to creating ecologically sustainable and actionable solutions, regardless of the project, and making sure that they're delivering for their clients. So again, a round of applause for Martin. And our second supporting sponsor is Harper Grey Llp. They are one of the leading regional law firms in Western Canada. They've been part of the local legal landscape for more than a century. They offer a wide range of legal services such as business law, corporate commercial litigation, insurance law, medical defense, and health law. Their size and diversity of practice allows them to represent a broad spectrum of clients. Ladies and gentlemen, again, Harper Grey. And at the Surrey Board of Trade, clients come to our office to start their business. Existing businesses look for business support through our business center. And at our international center, they're looking for global business connections. And we could not have that center without sponsors. So again, the accounting firm of PwC, the Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan, and the law firm of Fasken. Let's give them a great round of applause. Thank you so much also to our government representatives that are in the audience. City of Surrey Councillor Brenda Locke. And I know City of Surrey Councillor Linda Annis is on her way as well. I'd also like to thank our Surrey Board of Trade board directors, Tammy Ray with TD Bank. Let's give her a great round of applause. And Rowena Rizzotti of the Lark Group, Health and Technology District. Fabulous ladies on our board. So ladies and gentlemen, the Surrey Board of Trade, our whole mandate is to support business and bring business into the city. We're a city building business organization. We're a concierge of business connections. We instigate change at the different levels of government, and we offer cost-saving, time-saving benefits. And we have 6,000 member contacts. And more recently at our national convention through the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, we were recognized as being one of the top 3 out of 450 Chambers of Commerce, Boards of Trade recognized for our government advocacy work. So we're very pleased with that award. And we believe that transportation and education are the 2 economic foundations of building a city. And speaking of building a city, the BC Construction Association last week released its latest construction sector statistics. And they said that we have a booming construction sector. $115 billion in projects are underway in our province, and another $206 billion in proposed projects are on the horizon, meeting the challenges of continued growth. And of course, we're facing that growth here in Surrey. BC's construction industry continues to be the #1 employer in BC's goods sector, with more than 236,000 people relying directly on construction for a paycheck. That's up by 17% since last year. It's more than any other industry in our province. And speaking of construction and development, at each of your tables and also on our website is the more comprehensive version of the 4th Red Tape Survey results. And so this is the forum at our Development Industry Forum where we release our red tape results. And what's red tape? It's excessive bureaucracy or routines, complexity that we have to face as business people at the different levels of government. It's all of these forms, all of these different people that we have to talk to in order to do the business of the day. They cost us money and they cost us time. So our annual red tape survey gives us a baseline of our members' perceptions to measure how different levels of government can have the opportunity to improve processes. And when they improve processes, you as developers and those that support them, you can focus on doing your business. So, ladies and gentlemen, just to give you a bit of a summary of this year's results, over 67% of respondents indicated that the overall cost of compliance with regulations, not a surprise, have increased over the past 2 years at all levels of government. Red tape reduction is a very low-cost way to stimulate economy and boost productivity. So in summary, what's the impact of compliance? 71% of respondents said that they had a major impact on their business to comply. Number 2, financial costs of compliance. 67% of respondents said that overall costs have increased in the last 2 years. The time taken to fill out forms, 64% of respondents said that has increased in the last 2 years. It's up 8% from last year. And this is across an average across the board at all levels of government, local, provincial, federal. Filing taxes, 28% found that paying taxes to be a moderate to high cost of doing business, with over 25% now of respondents outsourcing income tax return filing. 44.7% identified CRA to have high levels of red tape, not a surprise. Over 30% rated the PST to have high levels of red tape, huge administrative burden, and we've been calling on the province to streamline the administrative burden related to PST. And over 29% find that WorkSafe BC has moderate to high levels of red tape. It's an impediment to innovation, ladies and gentlemen. 71% of respondents reported that compliance is definitely an impediment to growth and innovation. And that's a jump from 51% in 2017. Not acceptable. Measures that would reduce red tape, 86% of respondents wanted a reduction in the frequency of reporting to a minimum. That's a significant jump from 74% from last year. So again, we are on this path at the local government, provincial government, federal government, and all of these other agencies that we have to deal with. We want them to reduce, where possible, the number of times businesses have to report the same information Let's just talk to one person at City Hall, for example, that all levels of government improve their online service portals and call center services using clear language for instructions. It's so difficult, even for small businesses, to renovate, to get their electrical permit, for example. Governments need to streamline, share their information in gathering technology to minimize duplication. We are in this age of Industry 4.0, and there's so many opportunities to increase efficiency for our business community. So ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you to go online, businessinsurrey.com. It's under news, it's under policy, read the full report, and we all need to work together. We need to collaborate and speak to all levels of government and all of our government officials and administrative officials to get this red tape down, because it's costing us time, it's costing us money, and that's not acceptable. And so with these results in mind, we have two very dynamic speakers that are going to speak on trends, what needs to be improved for our economy, specifically for the development sector. They were so well received last year, so we brought them back again. You'll have a chance to ask them some questions, so keep that in mind. Our first speaker is a Vancouver-based architect, real estate consultant, and property developer. He serves on the faculty of SFU, and he's an affiliate of UBC's Masters in Urban Design program. He's been honored as a life member of the Architectural Institute of British Columbia. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome the very popular Mr. Michael Geller.
So while my presentation gets loaded here, let's just say there's two mistakes there. The first was the very popular Michael Geller. Certainly not in Vancouver, but maybe in Surrey. The second is I'm on the adjunct faculty of SFU. And those of you who are affiliated with universities know the difference between an adjunct faculty and a faculty is one gets paid. So it was a year ago. Remember this? And this was how the program was described, and we were going to look at the results of that red tape survey, and here we are again, still talking about it. And Ozzy and I were here, and I don't remember a lot of the event other than Ozzy saying, "This is the first time, Geller, I've been on stage with someone, and I don't seem to be able to get a word in edgewise." So this year I'm going to let Ozzy do all the talking. I'm just going to show the pictures. But in fact, one picture I want to show is of Ozzy, because I don't know how many of you have ever been to his events. He has a spring and fall event, downtown hotel in Vancouver, and I went this year, and it really was quite exceptional. And I wrote a column in the Vancouver Courier where I do get paid to write, and Google Michael Geller, Ozzy Jurok. This will come up because he had some wonderful advice, and one of the things that the audience noted was a lot of your predictions were surprisingly correct. Not everyone, but pretty close. You did predict a minority government this time around, too. You just said, given everything that was going on, you didn't know who would be leading it. And I think that might still hold true. So this was the title of my talk last year. We'd had the election. How are things going to change? And here's my outline from last year's talk. I wanted to talk about housing affordability, and I told you there's a lot of lessons that might come from the task force that the City of Vancouver had organized. But I also wanted to talk about how you create jobs. And since none of you remember my talk from last year, I'm going to give the same one again. No, I'm not. But I did want to highlight two things I did mention, and that is housing affordability. To some of you, you may say, look, if they don't want to work hard, let them pay for their own housing. The reality is municipalities, especially in British Columbia, if we don't have affordable housing for our employees or for people who are coming to work in our municipality, that is a problem. And right now, Vancouver and I often like to think I'm here to provide lessons from Vancouver, is slowly dropping in a lot of those livability surveys because people can't afford to live there. It's a genuine issue, and we're going to touch a little bit more about that. But business competitiveness depends on people being able to afford to live in the municipality. The other thing I mentioned was that the Vancouver Board of Trade, or the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, it had done quite a comprehensive study on looking at different ways to achieve greater housing affordability. And it's worth looking at. It's really very, very good. And you don't need to spend a lot of money looking at housing affordability. Look what the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade did, and then watch and see what this new federal provincial panel that's been set up under the chairmanship of Joy McPhail, what it comes up with. But I actually met with Joy yesterday, and I said, look, you don't have to spend a lot of money on this. Just look what the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade and the City of Vancouver did. There's some good things. The other good things that Vancouver has started to do is look at how to create employment. The joke was, back 30 years ago, we talked about the importance of people living close to where they work. And so we started building all of this housing in the city. The trouble is, we were building housing in the city on land that had been used for jobs. And before long, we realized we had done some wonderful things in terms of creating housing downtown. It's just that all the jobs had moved to Langley. You don't want to do that. We need to. So now Vancouver is quite deliberately saying, just a second, you can't put housing everywhere you want. We do need that balance between jobs and housing. And Vancouver quite aggressively is going after the high-tech sector, as are you. And I think they're doing a pretty good job. And some of the companies, as you know, Amazon, Microsoft, in a significant way are coming into to Vancouver. But one thing I think we do need to look at is we're not just a region of individual municipalities. We are a region. And the more that we can start to develop a regional economic development strategy so that it's the Vancouver region that goes out and competes with the Calgary region or New York or San Francisco, the better off we are. Because if it's just Vancouver competing against Surrey, competing against Burnaby, I have a feeling we may collectively lose out. And so last year's talk concluded with the future lives here. When this slogan was announced, I told then Mayor Diane Watts, you got it wrong. You're telling me you want people to work here, and here you got slogan is the future lives here. The future shouldn't just live here, it should work here. The future should be here. And the fact is, even in the years since I was here, you have made further strides towards creating a significant place. So now, what other lessons can we learn from Vancouver? Ozzy called me and said, Geller, how are we going to do this? I said, I'll tell you what, Ozzy, this year, I'm just going to do touchy-feely stuff. And you can tell them the nuts and bolts of development and making money through real estate. So that's what this is. I'm going to apologize. I'm putting on my architect's hat and my planner's hat to a certain degree, because ultimately I think you can learn from the mistakes that Vancouver and other major cities have made. Because the fact is, yes, we got a beautiful skyline, but we've also got unbelievable traffic congestion in our city. And it's starting to drive people away. It's starting to create problems. So borrowing from my friend Patrick Condon, a name some of you may know, because Patrick and I, 2 generations ago, worked on a planning charrette that eventually led to the creation of Clayton Heights. And I say that standing in front of you with a smile on my face. Clayton Heights will work if some of the rules that I'm about to share are followed. So what I'd like to do is look at some ideas, and if anybody wants this presentation, I'll give a PDF to Anita, and anybody can have it. So what I'd like to do is, how can Surrey start to look for planning so that it doesn't repeat a lot of the mistakes that other cities have been making? And the interesting thing is, there was a time when I didn't believe everything I'm telling you today, and I'm not sure I still believe everything I'm telling you, but it is right. One of the things we have to do is create a broader mix of housing in our neighborhoods. And one of the interesting examples in Vancouver are these large-scale developments, whether it's the North Shore Falls Creek, South Shore Falls Creek, in this case Collingwood Village, and so forth. The notion of having a mix of housing in these communities, even though as developers we fought it, in hindsight, I think was the right thing to do. At one point I'm going to ask for a glass of water, I just know it. But anyway, one way of achieving this mix of housing is through a policy direction that's taking place all over the world. And it's a term you're going to hear more and more of in Surrey and throughout Metro, inclusionary zoning. You want to build some condos? Of course you can build some condos, but we also want you to build some affordable housing. And this has prompted that debate in Vancouver about that awful term, poor doors. Have you heard of poor doors? This notion that where you have a development where perhaps there's affordable housing on the lower floors and market condos above, but the affordable housing has a separate entrance from the condominiums. And I'm an advocate of that. Thank you very much. Because from a market point of view, sometimes you do need to have that separation. You don't want people with their shopping carts in the lobby of the $1,000 square foot condominiums. A lot of politicians throughout Metro are saying, oh, we don't want to separate. That's naive thinking. If you want the development community to build affordable housing, recognize these market realities. The other market reality is that often the non-market housing component has separate ownership from the condominiums, so it should be separate. Transportation options. One of the reasons Clayton Heights failed, in my opinion, is that it was always viewed as a transit-oriented development. Well, it got the secondary suites, it got the smaller lots, it got the back lanes, but it didn't get the transit. And this, I think, is a serious issue. One of my first projects in Vancouver was the South Shore Falls Creek. Back in the 70s, that was all industrial land. The mayor of Vancouver was Art Phillips. He was a financial guy, Phillips, Hager, and North. He had an idea that South Shore Falls Creek should be a transit-oriented development, and there should be a bus in place the day the first residents moved in. And in return, we'd have lower parking. BC Transit, as it was then called, said that's nonsense. How can we afford to operate a bus when we don't have any residents? Phillips came up with the idea the residents will subsidize the bus service until such time as it's self-financing from the fare box, to the extent that any transit is self-financing. And so every unit at Falls Creek paid, in those days, $5 per month to BC Transit to subsidize the bus until such time as it was operational. I don't believe that's ever happened again. But think about it. As we're opening up all these new neighborhoods in Surrey, why don't we look at some more creative solutions so that we do get much better transit to serve these residents? And one of the real advantages of that is when you get good transit, you can reduce parking requirements, as they tried to do at my club. I showed this to my wife last night, and she said, did you Photoshop that? No, I said, that actually is somebody was trying to squeeze into a parking space. One of the things that is very important, I think, is starting to create the vibrant street life. You know, we all love to go to New York and many other cities, and parts of Vancouver have it. But I've recently been working in Russia and in what was called Astana, Kazakhstan, and they've created some very impressive areas there. But at the street level, it doesn't feel as vibrant and as lively. And Sharon Sethi, who's in the audience, and I talk about this a lot, because there's always this temptation to show pictures of our new towers shot up or bird's eye view. But most of us experience our cities at the street level. So how do you make streets vibrant? Back in the 70s, Ray Spaxman said every building along a street must have weather protection. We used to make fun of him, but he was absolutely right. So creating these vibrant streets with retail uses at grade, or in some places residential uses at grade, I think is the right way to go as you're planning not just the downtown, but many neighborhoods. Why aren't there corner stores in the new subdivisions? There should be. But the other thing is, while we're successful at doing residential over retail, we can put residential over other uses. A mistake we made in Vancouver is we rarely put residential over industrial. Now you're going to say, come on, really? Well, Bruno Wall finally tried it. This is a development at 900 East Hastings. The city said we'd like some industrial in the base of this building. Bruno did it. He got a huge density bonus. He found out he made more money on the industrial space selling it as strata lots than he did on the residential. There's ideas here. As you're looking at, we got lots of industrial parks. And at lunchtime, people get in their cars and drive off because there's nowhere to eat lunch except in the cafeteria. We need to think about creating these vibrant mixed areas even in the industrial. So I've talked about the importance of offering jobs close to home. You've got that, but don't ruin it by redeveloping all the industrial for residential. Mix it. You can't mix it everywhere, of course, but in some places you can. We just went through an election. One of the interesting things was the debate about climate change. And I have to admit, I'm slowly becoming an accidental environmentalist. But there was a time when I thought LEED was just bullshit, to be honest. But it isn't. If you're doing a commercial building, it has to be LEED certified. If you're doing residential, the buyers are slowly wanting to see some of these features. They want them, and I think it's important to deliver them, both for business reasons and also because we do have a collective responsibility to address our environment. One of the interesting things in Vancouver is they have a park space requirement. For every 1,000 additional residents, there's supposed to be another 2.75 acres of park space. I was the development manager for the Bayshore development next to Stanley Park. When we went through the rezoning, they said, you're short 4 acres of park space. I said, we're next to Stanley Park. No, they said, that doesn't count. Well, they were wrong about that. Stanley Park should have counted, but as we develop our neighborhoods, it's important to think about how do we ensure that the park space keeps up. And then the other thing is trees. Again, a lot of developers, we draw trees in our renderings, and then we build and hope that we don't have to put too many trees in the development. But the reality is, I think it is important. I don't know if you've been to many Asian cities in Tokyo and others, where the streets are lined with hedges and planting and trees. It's a different feeling. And I think Surrey should look at planting trees. Now, if the park department says we can't afford it, here's an idea. How about dedication trees? Everyone in this room should plant a tree on one of the new streets in Surrey and put a plaque. This is in honor of my daughter's graduation from SFU. I never thought it would happen. Things like that. My last rule, you're exploring, you're beginning with district energy, Vancouver's district energy. The jury's out for me on some of these district energy systems because I think they can cost more than the benefit. But sometimes they do work. And certainly the one in Southeast Falls Creek, which is taking heat off sewer lines, is working by all accounts. So don't fight this, work with it, but let's hope we don't have to do too much belt and suspenders where we have two systems in our buildings. So to conclude, I read this in Business in Vancouver. This is history repeating itself. Brent Totteran went on the radio in Vancouver not so long ago when he was director of planning to say, hey guys, to all of you buying property on Cambie Street, I don't really think you should be paying $12.5 million for a lot worth $3 million because we're going to hit you with a $61 or $68 square foot community amenity contribution. Jay Wallenberg, who goes around advising governments, and I know he advised Surrey, always says, don't worry, these CACs don't increase the cost of housing, they just bring down the value of the land. That's nonsense. They do both. They generally increase the cost of housing in Vancouver to the point that the developers who bought these sites can no longer develop them. There must be 40 sites along the Cambie corridor in Vancouver awaiting development. Imagine what that means. So as you start to get into this whole new conversation about community amenity contributions, land lift, and so forth, think about it very, very carefully, which brings me to my last point. It's not often I read in the newspaper that the mayor is sending a developer's proposal back because his building's not high enough. Usually the building goes back because it's too high. Like if you're in West Vancouver, it might be 3 stories when it should only be 2 stories. They did that on Monday night, believe it or not. I don't actually have an opinion. Well, I do have an opinion, but I'm not going to share it. I'm going to let Ozzy share his opinion. But we should have a discussion, I think, about who decides when a project is economically viable, the developer or the mayor. So with that, thank you very much. I hope I've given you something to think about. And very shortly, here's Ozzy.
Thank you so much, Michael. And we'll talk about the SkyTrain corridor during the question period. I'm sure you know the Surrey Board of Trade's position on that. We've been saying, we haven't been saying the future lives here. We're saying that Surrey is an opportunity city. Yes, we have to deal with the politicians of the day, but this is a place where the vision needs to be, where we live, learn, work, and play. And our second speaker is going to provide more detail on that. He is a fellow of the Real Estate Institute of Canada. He currently holds several positions. He's president of his own company, Jurock Publishing, founder of the Real Estate Action Group, and chairman of Jurock Case Investment Realty. He's a best-selling author and known as one of Canada's leading business motivators. We're so pleased to have him here in Surrey. Ladies and gentlemen, Ozzy Jurock.
Thank you so much with that fine introduction. I'm looking forward to what I have to say myself. I love Surrey. I love the Fraser Valley. In another lifetime, I used to have a fish and chips restaurant on the beach in White Rock. I bought the show home in Country Woods and owned houses in Redwood on 144th. I bought a lot of condominiums here. Just, I guess, 2 years ago, I bought 5 condos from Sharon. I bought some pre-sales. I like the area. I was also a judge at the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board commercial division for some 5 years. And in that position, I had the opportunity to look at the developments all over the Fraser Valley. And I was always impressed. The quality, the thinking that went into it. And so for me, I'm very honored to be here and speak to you. Now, before I go, I want to share this story with you. And this has to do with a group of bankers that were on their way to a conference. And there was 2 German bankers, 2 Canadian bankers, 2 Italian bankers, and 2 French bankers, and they each had 1 secretary with them. And as bad luck struck the plane, it landed on an island. Good luck was there was enough food and water. And after 1 week, the following scenario had developed. The German bankers gave the secretary the weekend off. The Italian bankers dueled each other to death over the secretary. The French banker said, c'est la vie, and went to bed with the secretary together. And the Canadian bankers were still awaiting instructions from head office. Well, that is clearly not the case in Surrey. You don't wait for instructions from anybody. You just go ahead and do the thing. What I'm trying to do today is tell you, we know that 1,000 people a month come to the city. We know that people come for a reason. Price, good relationship from the investor's point of view. Our investment company, our real estate company only deals with investors. They like the whole environment and the whole structure and the future because values grow where people go and they keep coming here. And what I want to talk about a little bit today is, will they keep on coming? I only see that little picture on the right, that's me. Because you're still here, Michael. I mean, there's 9 slides of you and 1 of me. Anyways, we have a lot of things going on in the world, and I want to just talk briefly and see why I believe that the future is bright as far as investment goes and as far as we're attracting capital into Canada goes. This slide, I show this every time when I make a speech for the last 20 years, because there's always some major crisis. I was looking at a slide I had in 1995 where Sweden had a 500% interest rate. There was always some Brexit, some Trump, some big event happening. And the headlines also wonderful. Realtors are prowling like hungry tigers. Sales are off by 43%. We'll never see these prices again. That was 1974. And the price was 54,000. Then we saw the stock market crash. Today is the worst ever. We're back to the 30s. Will real estate be next? Well, that was 1987. It was a bad crash, but you know it actually had a benefit to real estate because pension funds increased their holding to 6% from the then 2%. Yeah, but the terrible things that are going on right now, there's always something going on, a Russian crisis, an Asian flu, a Mexican crisis, incredible number of terrible things are always befalling us. And yet, had you bought a property at any time in the middle of all of these disasters, you would have outperformed any other investment you could have possibly made. So forecasting then is never easy, particularly when it is about the future. So that's what was the problem there. I thought it was funny, actually. But you know, there's no help from the economists either. All economists aspire to be accountants, but just don't have the personality, right? I mean, maybe that's not fair. All economists know 100 ways to seduce a woman, but they just don't know any women, right? So that's part of the problem. So we try and do and muddle through, but very quickly, the world is a crazy place. We have in these uncertain times, and this slide I've been showing this for a number of years, that the rich will continue to flee their terrible currency problems. They're stampeding literally into the cities of the world with their cash. And guess what? Canada is one of those countries that they're coming to. That's the only reason why I'm interested in. We are studying foreign investment and we're working with a number of foreign investors. In Europe, people don't trust globalization. They don't trust massive migration. They don't trust the establishment. And it means that they continue to take their money out of the euro. In Asia, they're taking it out of their currencies there. And why are they coming to Canada? We've been rated number 3 in the world as one of the stable and safest countries. So right behind Germany and the United States. We came from number 11 just 8 years ago. Toronto is now rated as the 8th safest city to invest your money. So the investor in Dubai or in Shanghai goes to his financial advisor and says, where should I put some money? Canada is now on the map. In Edmonton, a German company called Decker Immobilien 3 weeks ago invested $500 million in a tower. Yeah, in Edmonton. Of course, our oil center was bought by a German industrialist already 2 years ago for some $432 million. We have Iranians buying a lot of West Vancouver. So the money is coming. It's coming for safety, and it's looking to be safe. In China, President Xi really considers Taiwan and Hong Kong as renegade provinces. In the long term, he wants them back. And we may think this is also the momentary problem. It's an ongoing problem. I used to have the privilege of running a construction management company in Taiwan. And it was then the goal of mainland China, and it is now. And so out of the 300,000 Hong Kong Chinese, we are projecting 100,000 will come back. And I would tell you, most of them will settle right here. They will settle right here in the lower mainland, and certainly also from an investment perspective, they'll settle into commercial real estate in a dramatic fashion and as well as in residential. On the trade front, we always talk about the terrible US trade deal with China. I think President Trump is aiming to solve that next year sometime. He may be forced to do it sooner. But for us as Canada, our largest trading partner, we still have a great relationship, and that'll be good for us as well. Now, from the boomer perspective, I'm a boomer. We used to be the yuppies, you know, the young urban professionals. We run around in our BMWs, and we are yuppies. And now we become the dinks, which is dual income, no kids. You know, we don't, you know, who has time for kids? Are you kidding me? Now we're going to Yaletown and we're the dins, dual income, no sex. I mean, who has time? Are you kidding me? I mean, we're busy people, but now we're the Veeps, the Viagra enhanced excited people, you know, I mean, and these guys and girls, they're out there, they're buying that second property for you. But now what I really like in Vancouver with all the bike lanes are the mammies, the middle-aged men in spandex, you know, that are taking away my rightful my road. But anyhow, if you're none of these, you're the dual income little dog owner, right? A friend of mine came from Germany. He says, I've never ever seen anywhere in the world people that have a plastic bag on their hand and running behind their dogs, waiting for the dog. Well, anyways, this is Canada. He said, this is Canada. We're wonderful people. But we are also becoming millennials. And certainly in the building industry, we have to understand that the young people today, they don't want a car. My grandson doesn't want a car. I said, you don't want a car all my life. I've been wanting a better car, a bigger car. No, but I don't need a car for it. He doesn't understand the logic of it. I'm slowly understand what he's all about, because they are more informed, they want quick answers from their professional, they want facts, and they want money from their parents. Well, they always wanted money from their parents, but they're smarter now, they stay longer in their houses. I've always argued that we still need the big houses because the kids still living with us, right? Usually the kids used to leave at 22, now they're coming back at 26 with 2 more kids, so you do need the bigger houses. The point is, what is the future? I'm not going to bore you with my principles, but those, may I just ask, who is a subscriber to the free Osbars? Oh my God, this is a... Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, one of them, but then you have to write about one of your condos. But the point is, it's a free publication in which all of these are in great details I talk about. But the macro principles and the local never change. Are we in an inflationary world or deflationary world? Timing, trend, and cycles, and of course inward migration, interest rates, and so on. And like I say, the only thing that matters to me over 50 years is whether we are in an inflationary world or deflationary world. People saying, well, it's clear, we're going back to the 30s, we have red lines, and other people say it's the other way around. I look at it very, very simply, like Milton Friedman says that inflation is primarily a monetary phenomenon. And we have created more and more money in the world at an unbelievable rate. And that money that is created out of thin air competes with the money you and I earn, settles in hard assets, always has, always will. In 1998, in my book, Forget About Location, I wrote that if we kept on printing money that we did for 35 years leading up to 1998, and every property in 35 years from 1998 would be worth $6 million in Vancouver. And I was laughed at because the prices were $278,000. 2 years ago, we were 4.4 million on the west side. We had an enormous increase in value because of that inflation, or the most unreported inflation in the world. Because people always talk about commodity prices, and yes, our commodities can be in an outright deflation, depending on how much goods and services China buys from us. That can be a negative economic result in the commodity sector at the same time as we have runaway inflation almost on the hard asset side. I mean, painting selling for 400 million, more oysters being sold in Russia than any other time in history. All of these kind of crazy excesses come from a mad monetary policy. Well, what does it mean to us? It means that our real estate values will go up one more time. I mean, I traveled in the last 2 years to Sydney, Auckland, Panama City, Manila, Hong Kong, Dubai, Singapore, Rome, London, and everywhere prices are soaring. Munich, by the way, now is the leader in price increases this year. Slovenia went up 17%, but the money goes into the trophy cities, into the high cities, and I couldn't speak at length about it, but I have written about it in Osbars. I urge you to go there. So what has been the history? I mean, look at this enormous history we've had. If you bought a house for $100,000 in Vancouver and put down $5,000 on your down payment, you would have made 21,878%. Take that, stockbroker. I mean, they're always saying there are no returns on percentage basis in real estate. No matter when you bought, you did spectacularly well. And no matter what the circumstances were, whether it was 1987, whether it was 1993, 1993 our 5-year term mortgage was 13%, or whether it was 2008, when you read the papers at the time, it was the end of the world. And we're again in that kind of a flux that things look so poor, but look at the incredible unrelenting increase in values till 2016. We've now had a slight reversal. And when you take a look at the numbers, we are changing. Vancouver now has had a 46% increase in sales for the month of September, but that's the 3rd month in a row that single-family homes have increased by sales by more than 35%. Listings at the same time are down between 10 and 15%. And when you look at the whole sector overall, we forecast in August that we had bottomed on the single-family home sector and that condos will have a ways to go. And the thing we always get quoted on the large declines are really the excesses on the luxury market. Yes, on the west side, we went from 4.4 million to 3.1 million in a 2-year period. that was a sharp decline in some of the other prices as well. In Surrey, the slide last year shows sort of a dramatic change, because last year our sales were down 36% at this time, and our listings in the condo sector were up 110%. This year, sales are up 36%. Our listings are actually down to even as they were last year, and obviously we are also slowly stabilizing here. I talked at length to Scott Brown from Fifth Avenue Marketing. He says that the recovery overall is being driven by investor and user demand, which is surprising to him, and he particularly in the markets that are between the $300,000 and $550,000 range. 2 of 3 top-selling projects in the last 100 days were large wood frame projects in central Surrey and North Delta. And he's talking in general, the price range over $750,000 is still very slow, but there's signs for improvement in the large townhome area. The new affordable wood frame product in South Surrey is almost non-existent, and he sees that to be a big surge in the year 2020. And of course, the projects along the SkyTrain route, as well as all the way down Fraser Highway, is very positive on. He's concerned with the new step code projected increase in concrete construction costs, which would drive the minimum possible pricing on high-rises at over $800 a foot, which then would create further demand, maybe in the wood frame as an option for the buyers. And so, overall, what is also positive is the federal government has increased its target on immigrants to 350,000. We believe a lot of those will settle here. Last year we had a net of just under 59,000 people growing British Columbia. We have 140,000 students looking to either rent or buy, mostly rent. But we have another 60,000 students that are not in the official summaries because they're still here on a student visa. So a lot of people come in, a lot of people wanting to be here, and that means they have to have some sort of accommodation. In fact, the federal government now is identifying some small towns to move immigrants into, which in the West Kootenays are supposed to be Trail, Castlegar, Rossland, Nelson, Vernon, and throughout the prairies they are trying to direct the immigrants there. So what does it mean? More people coming to where you are, and more people buying the products that you're building. The interest rates, well, Canada has stayed the same this morning, and there's going to be a lot of talk about it. I haven't heard it yet. It's be out now. The US probably will lower for their own reasons, and that means that our loonie might be stronger. It also means, in my mind, that interest rates, a time has come to lock in. I really feel that 2.9% 5-year term for our average buyer is where they should be. I think we have seen the bond market bottom at all-time lows a few weeks ago. The point is, that is a mug's game. I mentioned already earlier that we see big investments now coming into Canada, whereas before it was individual investors. It's now big corporations looking at us in earnest. Inward migration is going to continue. I don't think the federal government is going to drop its stress test. I wish they would at least drop it for Calgary, Edmonton, or the smaller towns, and leave it maybe for Vancouver and Toronto, but I don't think they will. They'll bring in a 1% speculation tax, a foreign buyer's tax rather, and they will hang their hat on their first-time buyer loan, which really participates government now in that loan, which is sort of a first for Canada. And then finally, industrial, we have the lowest rent. The overnight deliveries changes the market dramatically. Actually, downtown warehouse space is probably the way where you want to be, so that overnight delivery really can take place. Lots of opportunities there. The retail properties, I would stay out of them. The world is changing. The US, over 1,000 department stores have closed down. That's going to come here too. A lot of the companies that you know, the Gap, Abercrombie Fitch, all of them, they're all going down because of Amazon picking up the delivery. And so very, very unpredictable market. The conference board loves us. The headwinds are good. There's a strong population growth, makes Vancouver attractive. In fact, the whole Lower Mainland, Bob Reddy says we have the best economic fundamentals in Canada. Rebounding is in place. And then finally, the money-making trends are the movie industry. It is mind-boggling that we've now second largest movie-producing city after Los Angeles. We're even beating out New York. Renovating for student housing. The whole environmental business has a tremendous opportunity, particularly, I think, in Surrey and the Fraser Valley. We we feel that the millennials will be staying in town. They don't want to move out of town. My grandsons, they're very interested in buying real estate, but not in town. It's too expensive for them. And they will rent, and they will, as I said, they won't have a car. So the future is, best place to be will always be, in my view, cash flow real estate, and particularly in the Fraser Valley where it's affordable, where you actually can achieve a cash flow. British Columbia, we have the consumers are the biggest driver, and we see it. We have a solid growth cycle. We have a lot of job growth, employers looking for labor, population growth is strong, and non-permanent employment is in record territories. The high-tech, the movie industry, export construction has created a very diverse economy for us. Our strongest GDP growth in Canada, lowest unemployment, highest job growth. And 70% of Canadians want to retire, and we see them. Most of them want to go to Victoria, so we have to still convince them to come to Surrey. Listen, and finally, the best market is between your own ears. You know, it's a mind-boggling to me how the whole world sits at our immigration offices wanting to become here, and we're here, right? And we're still complaining. We have really nothing to complain about. So whatever you do, have some fun doing it, enjoy yourself. I mean, I find amazing that we have a living room and we don't live there, right? I mean, I can tell you what your living room looks like. There's 2 built-in flowers over each fireplace. There's a 3-piece couch and 2-piece couch. And your whole life you tell people, get out of the living room. Don't go in the living room. So people are now building rec rooms so they don't have to live in the living room. So this makes it so different. No, do some, live in your living room. Enjoy yourself. I get up happy. I look at the mirror in the morning and say, you will be happy in Germany. If that doesn't work, I say, I'm cute. Doesn't work, I go back to bed. And have a bubble bath. You know, people don't have bubble bath anymore, you know that. And use lots of bubbles. I mean, bubbles. You know, I mean, really enjoy yourself, and you can persuade your significant other to join you. You look at your bathtub in a whole new light. And finally, do something different. Do some dancing. I go to this yoga class, dancing, and everybody that's there doesn't need to be there. There's skinny little girls hopping around, so I'm trying them. I'm going, you know, and there's mirrors everywhere. It's awful. My belly's over here. It's not fair. So I've decided I go for Irish yoga. Irish yoga is... I'm not saying that you should do this, but I think that is an enjoyable thing. But Surrey has extremely cool, active, and good-looking people, and I'm sure you will. Thank you very much.
Ozzy, you're always so entertaining. So ladies and gentlemen, we do have time for questions or comments. There's a microphone in the middle of the room. Please state your name or your company name, and I'll just start it off. So tell us a little bit, first of all, about the provincial government. What's your opinion about all of these taxes? Is it really good for our economy? Is it good for affordable housing?
So I'm developing 2 small projects in West Vancouver, and I mentioned to my wife over the weekend, if the Liberals had won that last election, I would have made some money on these projects. But since the NDP won, I'm losing money.
Yeah, but what people don't realize, extra taxes are just like increases in interest rate. They take money out of the economy. And clearly, there has been a major result in accelerating our downturn in the last 2 years. It's just absolutely mind-boggling how many taxes we have and what it increases. We did a summary of 193 unit development in Port Moody, and over a 3-year period, that cost $70,000 a suite just in taxes and fees. And it's an unbelievable burden. And then the end product, federal governments always talk about, we have affordability, but most of the costs really come locally as well, right? So taxes on the provincial level, maybe delays on the local level make it much more difficult to produce the end product.
It's not just the cost of taxes, Anita, it's also the overall faith in the economy. And Ozzy talked about the number of people who now look at Metro Vancouver, Canada, and Surrey as places to invest. And I think it becomes a factor. But the other side of it is, don't expect this NDP government to disappear. It's going to win the next election, because certainly where I live, every time they eat the rich, tax the rich, that gets votes. And so I'm expecting this government to remain. And to be fair, it is appreciating the fact that it needs a stronger economy, but it does place more responsibility, to my mind, on individual municipalities to become more attractive to investment and development. And as Ozzy pointed out here, the real challenge is accommodating the people who are coming here. And it's not just people coming from other provinces. I see a lot of people from Vancouver moving to Surrey. And you say, well, why? Is there a church here? Is there a butcher here? No. But their children and their grandchildren are here. And that's why people move from the west side of Vancouver to Surrey.
So
Yeah, excellent point.
tell us a little bit, so waiting for questions from the audience, I'm going to continue. Tell us a little bit about election cycles and changes in political decisions. There was a lot of land speculation on the LRT route. A lot of developers had intentions for that L line, and things have shifted. You know, what happens to the development community, construction community, when these types of major decisions happen?
Well, just last year we talked about that sometimes the city council comes in and somebody's been, like in Whitelock, wants to build a 15-story building, and the council comes in and says you can only do 12. I mean, it's unbelievable that in North Vancouver we have a very similar kind of a change in government that is unsustainable for me as a developer to go into the ground, and we'd rather not.
But we also see the opposite situation here, where we have a mayor and a council, and Brenda Locke is here. Certainly the mayor is being very encouraging in terms of wanting to create more development, larger developments. One can presume it's also related to the community amenity contributions and development cost levies that the municipality will receive. That certainly has been the case in Vancouver, where developers have been encouraged to make larger developments in return for larger financial contributions. But I think you have to be careful, as I mentioned briefly, and I wasn't making it up. I'm aware of 40 projects right now along the Cambie corridor, in the various, both along Cambie Street and the area behind Cambie Street, where the excitement of the transit brought in a lot of investors. They were paying over $400 and in many instances $500 a foot buildable for the land, hoping that they would get $1,400 a foot buildable sales price. Well, now the sales price, if there is a market, is closer to $1,000, $1,100 a foot. The projects don't make sense. Now you could say, well, whose fault is that? Well, it's greed, it's expectation, it's a little bit of everybody else is doing it, we better get in on the bandwagon. But I think now that Surrey is beginning to see the potential uplift associated with transit, I think people have to be prudent and realistic. There's no doubt that the one thing that did influence our markets over the last couple of years were the foreign buyers, and particularly the Chinese buyers, mainland Chinese buyers. They distorted the marketplace in Vancouver. The new taxes there are certainly having an impact, and Aussie obviously has some views on it as well. But it does create a level of uncertainty that you don't know what to do. Because I grew up, my parents were from England, and if I asked my mother something and she didn't know the answer, Aussie, she'd say, Michael, it all depends on the price of tea in China. Well, the irony is, I think our real estate market does depend on the price of tea in China.
Well, it certainly does to some extent as to how many people come from everywhere. I try to make the point it isn't only China that is coming. There's a lot of people from around the world looking for places to invest. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. What I find always amazing is so that, and I said that last year, that developers have this bad name, that somehow they're to blame. And yet the developer takes the chance, and those developers that were buying that property along Cambie took a huge chance and actually lost. I mean, not everybody is making money, and it's not being recognized. Number one, I do agree with you. I have a lot of my friends, they think that the NDP is finished. Absolutely not. The polls showed, although I don't trust polls, the polls showed. And yes, there's a lot of people that support them. So if you want to fight the NDP, you better get out there and better get out front and not just talk around your coffee table. The point I'm trying to make is in general terms that more people coming to an area is a good thing. it forces us to create accommodation, it forces us to expand, and forces us to grow. And when I look at the Fraser Valley, where 20% of all the resale activity in BC is taking place, I think on balance, Fraser Valley is doing a good thing, and that includes the good thing by the local government. Even the new mayor, he has a lot of detractors, but he's getting things done in his way, and that's what he was elected for.
To the audience.
Gentlemen, hi, my name is Rob Blackwell. I'm with Anthem Properties. A couple of the things that you were saying made me think about some things, and I wanted to get your opinion on it. There's 40 projects stuck on Cambie. We don't have any projects on Cambie Street, but we have stuck projects. So there's lots of stuck projects around the city for a combination of reasons. If that's the case, and the market is sort of bubbling along the way it is right now, what are your thoughts on getting them unstuck? One of the issues, one of the challenges that we see is what Anita mentioned earlier, which is red tape, time, and risk, which you just mentioned, Ozzy, and CAC density bonus negotiations, and this trust issue between developer and city. How do we get to the table to discuss one of the things that you said, Michael, which was who determines the economic viability of a project? Like, who's the final arbiter? Who believes who? And how do we have that conversation in a palms-up method? Because I think that's what's needed in order to unstick those projects. So the trust of here's our situation versus here's what we need, how can we work together? I don't think we're there, and I don't know how to get there right now in any of the conversations we've had. Thanks.
So I'll have a first go.
Absolutely.
Well, you can come up with a more thoughtful answer. So I remember when Larry Beasley was the co-director of planning in Vancouver, and he wanted to have these two-story podiums along every arterial street with towers or apartments above. And I remember somebody saying, I don't think there's enough Chinese restaurants in the entire world to fill all the second floor retail that Beasley wants us to build. And it raised this whole question of who decides where the marketplace is. The planners wanted a certain architectural form. In the end, some of that space did in fact become Chinese restaurants, some of it did become second floor office space, some of it became residential, but the reality is the marketplace ultimately has to decide what works and what doesn't work. And it's difficult when the mayor says, if you want to add a few more floors, I don't mind. You have to make sure those few floors will work. In terms of how people are trying to deal with these sites that aren't viable at the moment, the Altus Group is actually doing a survey on it right now. One thing I have seen is a number of developers switching from condominium to rental, because while the numbers may not even work for rental today, think of those people who built rental apartment buildings 5 years ago. They're looking very good. So one option with condominiums is to turn it to rental. You can still strata title the building, but if you intend to keep it as rental for 5 or 10 years, you can put a covenant on the title such that BC assessment will then value it as rental building, not as individual condos, to at least help keep the taxes down to a more manageable level. So on some sites, I think that's an option. Another option that I've been pitching is this idea of making your site available for relocatable modular housing. That was my thesis at university, this idea of moving modules, putting them on a site when it's ready to be used. So maybe somebody could take us, if you've got a parking lot or a development site, offer to make it available for relocatable modular units, get a bit of a land lease payment, and when the site's ready to go, you can move the housing to another site.
There's a lot there, Michael. Just certainly on the rental side, some of the developers that I know don't want to build rental properties because the law has changed. We now have no more fixed leases. We have the rent increases that were allowed before are fixed now, so you can't really do the renovation. But I do agree that we will have more renters, more lifetime renters in the future. So clearly, eventually, that's going to happen. In terms of, I said last year, I felt the development industry was holding back. There's always that fear about arguing about something that happens with the city because this is, I think, a false sense that they're going to get even with you. But I think the development industry are not the bad guys. They had actually taken a chance. They are a prime example of our free enterprise society. They're taking a chance, and sometimes they don't win. So I said last year, sell what you have in a really strong fashion. By that I mean, I'm on the radio every Saturday with Michael Campbell, and we were joking about one developer offering a free bottle of wine a month for a buyer. And my argument to the buyer today is, you go out there and the market is hotter than a firecracker, and when 5 people wrestle each other to the ground in the living room of the cellar and pay $100,000 too much, that's when you buy. When you should be out there now and ask the developer for maybe a second parking spot, maybe even a car, and invite some Teslas are being offered. But make it clear that you want to sell these units and then get through the low point. We have Lettingham took off all of their product. Eventually that product is all going to come back, and maybe there is some oversupply. We seem to be going through the cycle. The point I'm trying to make is we will come out of this because we will have a lot of people coming. But I think the development industry should fight hard on saying we're not the bad guys here. We're not.
Rob, maybe a couple of other thoughts. One of the big cost components for new residential development is the cost of parking. Sometimes estimated at $40,000 a space and so forth. If you can significantly reduce the cost of the parking, that can become a factor in terms of helping you bring down the price per square foot. But then the question is, of course, how do the people get around? I'm not sure how successful the car share programs are in Surrey. That's what I thought you might say. Certainly in Vancouver, although when I started at SFU, car share was for people who hugged trees and wore Birkenstocks. That's not the case anymore. A lot of people I know have got rid of their second cars or even their first cars and have joined car share programs. I think there's tremendous potential there to reduce costs, get the municipality to relax the parking requirement, but in return put in car share spaces. And if there isn't an active car share program, then make it viable for car share to work in Surrey.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Thank you. Chair Sethi from the Construction. Surrey is really affordable compared to north of the river. I'll just doing some numbers with how affordable we really are. But the government and the various authority don't make it. So a $262,500 condo in Wally ends up, if we took all the taxes off, it's only $211,200. So the question is, should we actually be advertising this as $211,200 as a condo price, and then add taxes at it, same as they in Toronto, even DCCs have actually added on after the fact when the purchase is closing.
Well, it's similar to your parking. I went parking yesterday on Broadway, and it says $4.35. When it came up, it was $5 and something. So they added taxes. They don't show the taxes, I guess. But the point is, the taxes are there. And when the federal government election was fought on affordability, there's really not much they can do if you have locally more and more taxes added to the cost. Whether or not it would work, you can be the first one to try it.
Well, you raise an interesting point. One thing is those taxes are hurting the buyer or the renter. On the other hand, if we don't pay those taxes, then Brenda Locke and her colleagues in the administration of the municipality are going to say, we cannot afford to put in new streets. We cannot afford to upgrade the sewers and provide the adequate water supply. So there is a balancing act to be achieved. But one of the things that I think we do need to have a more full conversation about is how do we finance growth? In the 50s, when my family was growing up in Toronto, developers weren't being expected to build all the streets for everybody. The municipalities built the streets. And in some cases, you paid for that through your property taxes, and in other instances, you paid for it through local improvement charges. I think there is a need for a discussion on whether or not it's right for the buyer of Sharon Setty's condo to basically be financing a lot of the public infrastructure, or whether or not it should be more broadly spread out, because that, I think, is really at the crux of the issue.
I think I can answer that a little bit. As far as the streets are concerned, we, the developer, are actually the developers of the cities, of all the infrastructure around our projects. Next one is parking. My projects are adjacent to, or within 2 minutes walking distance to the SkyTrain. We've given all sorts of reports regarding how much parking should there be, really, what's really needed now, and what's going to be needed from 2, 5, 10, 15 years from now. But when the powers within says, no, this is what we want, there's no rationale. How do you contract that?
That was easy. Brenda, when you get back to the office, if you can tell your engineering department that Michael Geller said you should take all of our minimum parking requirements and make them the maximum parking requirements. Because think about it. We're concerned about congestion. We're concerned about greenhouse gases. We're concerned about housing affordability. Why in the world would we ever have minimum parking requirements? We should have maximum parking requirements. If a developer wants to build a building with no parking for the residents other than perhaps some visitor parking, I say let him or her. And not only am I saying that, many municipalities throughout the world are now allowing new developments. In Toronto and New York, I've seen multi-unit buildings be going up with no parking.
Actually, my hometown of Cologne in Germany started no parking building already 10 years ago.
Any other questions? So just one final question is, and I'm sure you've heard this, because Surrey is growing so rapidly by 800 to 1,000 people a month, we haven't kept up the pace with infrastructure, schools, to be more specific. So, some developments have been stalled because there's not enough school infrastructure. You have to wait for the schools. What's your opinion about that? I mean, can we really stop development if we don't have enough schools? Shouldn't it be together?
I think I want to you.
So, some of you know I spent 7 years at Simon Fraser University developing a community that's called University, with a C, not an S. And I knew that this would be a financially lucrative venture for the university if we could provide a focus on education. And so it was determined that we would have a school in place the day the first families moved in with children, and discovered that's impossible. We offered to give the school board a free building in order to accelerate the timing. Those of you who deal in government, can you imagine what it's like convincing the board of governors of a university to give one of its buildings to a public school system? But eventually we did it, and it accelerated it. But again, we need to have a more thorough public discussion about the fact that not just in Surrey, but even in the city of Vancouver and throughout British Columbia, we are not keeping up with the construction of educational facilities with population growth. The irony is in some places we have the opposite problem, where we have declining school populations and we've got empty schools. So there needs to be a balance. But again, I think part of the answer is go back to my idea of the modular housing. When I went to school, I remember my mother in tears, Ozzy, because I came home and told her that I was in a portable. And she thought it was like a second-class form of education. But in fact, our portable classroom was nicer than the classrooms in the old school. And actually, the teachers kind of liked being in the portable sometimes. So the point is, let's be creative. I've always preached Edward de Bono, lateral thinking. Sure, it takes a long time to build a brand new school and get all the approvals, but it doesn't take that long to bring 30 portable classrooms onto a vacant site and set it up as a school until the permanent school is built. Because the reality is, the way we're doing it right now doesn't work. The City of Vancouver is about to start a school in Cole Harbour. Cole Harbour was developed in the early 90s. They complain there are no families with children there. Of course there aren't many families with children. The only ones who are there send their children to Mulgrave and Collingwood in West Vancouver or Crofton House because there are no local schools to walk to. But there is a solution. We just need to get school board officials and political officials at the provincial level to say we don't have to wait to see the whites of the children's eyes before we build the school.
And I vote we make him the chairman of the committee to study all this and get it implemented.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause. Thank you so much, Michael and Ozzy. And absolutely, there's much to be optimistic about to make Surrey that opportunity city, all of Surrey. And ladies and gentlemen, let's give another great round of applause to our sponsors, Applin & Martin and Harper Grey Llp. And just a couple of reminders. A couple of weeks ago at our manufacturing reception, we released the first ever Surrey labor market study workforce strategy. It actually aligns with the construction and development construction sector. So check it out online, businessinsurrey.com, under the policy section. It will help you drive your business plans. Just a couple of event reminders. On November 13th is the 21st Annual Surrey Business Excellence Awards. Actually, one of our finalists for Business Person of the Year is Sharon Sethi in the house. And let's see who's going to win. November 20th, we're bringing Steve Forbes to Surrey for the Surrey Innovation Awards, Global Media Giant. That's going to be a fabulous event. I encourage all of you to attend. November 21st is our Surrey Agriculture Industry Reception, because a third of Surrey's land base is agricultural, and there's some great agri-innovation taking place in our city. And unbelievably, December 10th is the Surrey Board of Trade's Christmas party, our seasonal sizzle business reception in the evening at the Sheraton Hotel. Ladies and gentlemen, make it a great business day.